you got to stay on. They have quality depth at every position. They've got size. They've got elite skill set. And so for us, we got to be on, and we got to be attentive, and we got to be aware the entire possession defensively. It's going to take a lot out of us. This is not, we can't just go out and try to outscore Dallas. They can score too. So we've got to be really intentional defensively in our coverages and executing our coverages. But we got to take it one possession at a time.
All right, bring us home.
There is a moment in every sports season where the mask slips, where the carefully constructed narrative that a franchise has been building throughout the offseason, through media days and training camp soundbites and glossy promotional content, suddenly falls completely apart in real time on a national stage. For the Indiana Fever, that moment did not happen during the game. It did not happen when the final buzzer sounded in overtime. It happened in a quiet press conference room, under fluorescent lights, with a microphone sitting on a table and a head coach who said something so mathematically disconnected from reality that millions of people across every major social media platform stopped scrolling and started sharing. Trust is the hardest currency to earn in professional sports. Coaches spend entire careers building it. Organizations spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to manufacture it, and it can disappear in a single sentence. Stephanie White destroyed a significant portion of that trust in one press conference, and the moment her own franchise superstar sat down in that same chair and contradicted her directly, the internet caught fire. This is the full story of what happened after the Indiana Fever lost their home opener to the Dallas Wings. Why the quotes coming out of that press conference are being called some of the most alarming in modern WNBA history. Why Caitlyn Clark's own words are raising serious medical red flags that the organization is desperately trying to minimize. And why a fan base that has already been deceived once is completely refusing to extend another ounce of good faith to a front office that has not yet earned it back.
Started off a little slow, I think, just the anxiety of the first game, trying to work through that. But overall, I felt good, felt fast out there. Felt like I was literally a couple buckets away from putting together a really, really good game and helping us win. But our offense is obviously not the issue. We're perfectly fine on offense, and there's still so many things we can do better on that end of the floor. But you got to get.
Before we get to the quotes, we need to establish the full context of what happened on the court, because the basketball reality makes everything that followed even more infuriating. The Indiana Fever lost their home opener to the Dallas Wings in overtime, surrendering 107 points inside their own building. Let that number register. 107 points, at home, to a team that won 10 games last season, a team that by every traditional metric of professional basketball evaluation should not be capable of putting that kind of offensive performance together against a roster as talented as the one Indiana has assembled. But here is the part that makes it genuinely complicated. The Indiana Fever offense was not the problem. Caitlyn Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, and Aaliyah Boston combined for 73 points. 73 points between three players is not a failure. That is not a performance that requires post-game soul-searching about offensive execution. That is a masterpiece. That is three elite professional athletes doing exactly what they were brought together to do. The problem was the defense. The problem was the bench, which managed to contribute exactly 5 points across 56 combined minutes of playing time. The problem was a defensive philosophy that, despite being described in the press conference as intentional and coverage-based, produced a result that looked nothing like intention and everything like chaos. So when the media gathered in that press conference room, the basketball world was watching to see how a head coach would respond to a very clear, very specific defensive collapse in a game her team had more than enough offensive firepower to win. What they got instead was something nobody was prepared for.
Again, on the floor, learning how teams are going to play differently against us with all of those three and the rest of our core back together on the floor. And so we got to be patient with that process. I know we want it instantaneously, and that's kind of the world we live in. Everybody wants everything right now. But I think we give each other grace and give ourselves grace through this process. But these guys are competitive.
Embarrassing.
And they
Stephanie White sat at the podium and was asked about the challenge of competing against the Dallas Wings moving forward. Her answer, delivered calmly and without any apparent awareness of how it would land, was the following. We cannot just go out and try to outscore Dallas. They can score too, so we have got to be really intentional defensively in our coverages and executing our coverages. Read that again slowly. We cannot just go out and try to outscore Dallas. This statement coming from the head coach of a team that features Caitlyn Clark, one of the most prolific offensive playmakers in the history of women's basketball, is not just philosophically questionable. It represents a fundamental misunderstanding of the primary competitive advantage her own roster possesses. The Indiana Fever were not constructed to be a grind-it-out defensive team. They were assembled to be an offensive juggernaut. Their entire identity, from their marketing strategy to their ticket pricing to their national television deal, is built on the promise of elite, high-octane, exciting offensive basketball. When the head coach of that team publicly declares that outscoring the opponent is not a viable strategy, she is not just making a tactical error. She is signaling to her players, to the league, and to the entire fan base that she does not fully grasp the nature of the weapon she has been handed. The analogy is almost too obvious to make, but it has to be made. Imagine the head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs standing in front of a microphone after a loss and saying, "Well, we simply cannot go out and try to outscore people with Patrick Mahomes because other teams can score too." The press conference would immediately be over. The coach would be walking out of a job within 48 hours, because in professional sports, that level of strategic surrender is disqualifying. White's statement is defensible only in the most narrow, context-free interpretation possible. Yes, in the abstract, any basketball team needs to play defense. Yes, the Dallas Wings have talented offensive players. Yes, Paige Bueckers is a phenomenal scorer. None of that is in dispute. But the moment you're the head coach of a team that just had 3 players combined for 73 points and your post-game analysis is that you cannot try to outscore people, you have completely lost the thread. You have looked at a Ferrari and decided the best strategy is to drive the speed limit.
Have a player-led team going into the season, especially with championship aspirations.
It's really important. I mean, they're our big three, and continuing to challenge them to take ownership of that. And that's not just on the floor. It's off the floor. It's in the locker room. It's when things aren't going your way. It's when things are going your way. It's holding each other accountable and the team accountable. It's lifting each other up and the team up.
What happened next made everything exponentially more significant. Minutes after Stephanie White left the podium, Caitlyn Clark sat down in that same chair. A reporter asked her about the offensive performance and the state of the team. Clark looked at the microphone and said clearly and without hesitation, "Our offense is obviously not the issue. We are perfectly fine on offense." There it is, a direct, unambiguous, on-the-record contradiction of her head coach's primary post-game narrative. Stephanie White told the world the Fever cannot outscore opponents. Caitlyn Clark told the world the offense is perfectly fine. One of these two people is right, and the statistics support the player over the coach without any meaningful debate. When your 3 best players score 73 combined points, the offense did its job. The scoreboard tells the rest of the story. 107 points allowed is a defensive catastrophe, not an offensive one. This kind of public contradiction between a star player and a head coach is not a small thing in professional sports. It is the kind of moment that gets replayed in locker rooms, dissected in front offices, and referenced in end-of-season coaching evaluations. When the most important player on your roster publicly, if perhaps unintentionally, undermines your primary post-game talking point, the relationship between those two people deserves serious scrutiny.
Shot the ball incredibly well. Really, the only quarter we put together was the third. I guess in the fourth we were fouling. So, but figured it out a little bit there in the third. We just got to be able to do that a little more consistently. But it was a great test. It was a great game. Our locker room was positive afterwards. So we're not going to hang our heads. We're going to move forward. A lot to be proud of, and a lot to learn from too. So there's only one of 44. We got a long ways to go.
If the viral quote about outscoring opponents was the inciting incident, the next comment Stephanie White made poured gasoline directly onto the fire. When asked about the chemistry and timing challenges of integrating a roster with championship expectations, White leaned into language that the fan base did not receive well at all. She talked about a growth process. She talked about patience. She said the word grace. She said we give each other grace through this process. The word grace is not inherently wrong. In a vacuum, it reflects a mature understanding that professional sports teams require time to develop cohesion, and there is genuine basketball truth in that observation. But context is everything in communication, and the context here was catastrophically wrong. You do not ask fans who paid $97 for an opening night ticket to extend grace after a home loss to a 10-win team. You do not ask a fan base that traveled across the country, booked hotels, and organized their lives around this product to be patient with a growth process. These are not college students watching their first-year program develop. These are professional fans who have made real financial commitments based on the reasonable expectation of a competitive professional basketball product. The word grace in that specific context on that specific night communicated one thing clearly. We are not ready to compete at the level we promised you we would compete at, and we need you to lower your expectations accordingly. Beaver Nation heard that message loud and clear. The comment section under the press conference footage became, by all observable metrics, a place of genuine fan outrage. The phrases "zero accountability" and "hand in your clipboard" were appearing repeatedly. The fans are not angry because they are unreasonable. They are angry because they have been promised one thing and delivered another, and the person responsible for delivering on that promise is sitting at a podium asking them to be patient.
A question about the injury report when he downgraded to out. Can you give us an update there?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is we want her to be 100% when she's out there. You know, we don't want her to be hesitant. We want to be, this is just overly cautious to make sure that we're not putting her in any position to regress.
So, is you saying this?
You made a couple of quick trips to the locker room. Was there a reason for that?
Sorry, just a second. Oh, my bad. Just getting my back adjusted if it's out of line pretty quickly. So just getting my back put back in place a little bit. But other than that, feel great. But
What made the press conference even more difficult to watch was the moment when Stephanie White was asked about the leadership role of her 3 star players. Her response was revealing in ways she may not have intended. She talked about continuing to challenge Caitlyn Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, and Aaliyah Boston to take ownership. She said leadership is not just on the floor but in the locker room, off the floor, when things are not going your way. She framed the leadership development of her star players as an ongoing project, something still being cultivated, something she was actively pushing them toward. This is a coaching tell of the highest order. When a head coach loses a game, and the post-game narrative centers on challenging the players to take more ownership and lead the locker room more effectively, that coach has successfully redirected the accountability conversation away from herself and toward the people who work for her. It is a subtle move, but an unmistakable one to anyone who has spent significant time studying how coaches communicate in the aftermath of difficult losses. The reality of professional sports leadership is straightforward. When things go wrong, the head coach owns it publicly and completely. You do not sit at a press conference podium and talk about challenging your players to be better leaders when your defense just surrendered 107 points. You look the media in the eye and say plainly that the team was not defensively prepared, and that the responsibility for that failure belongs entirely to you. Stephanie White did not say that, she has not said that, and the absence of that statement is being noticed by every single person paying close attention to this franchise. Caitlyn Clark's press conference produced another moment that, while receiving less attention than the back injury revelation, deserves significant examination. When discussing the aftermath of the loss, Clark said that the locker room was positive. She said the team was not going to hang their heads. She said there was a lot to be proud of. Now, let us be genuinely honest about what this reveals, because it is important. There is a version of this quote that is completely healthy. Professional athletes who spiral into destructive self-criticism after every loss do not win championships. Resilience, perspective, and the ability to reset emotionally are genuine competitive advantages. A team that cannot move past a single loss will not survive a 44-game season. But there is another version of this quote that is genuinely alarming. And the version that should concern every Fever fan is the possibility that this team, at the organizational and cultural level, has not yet developed the visceral hatred of losing that separates good teams from great ones. True competitors in professional sports do not feel positive after winnable home losses. They feel furious. They feel embarrassed. They feel a burning, uncomfortable, restless energy that refuses to let them sleep until they figure out exactly what went wrong and how to prevent it from ever happening again. That anger is not destructive. It is fuel. It is the engine that drives championship organizations forward through the grinding, brutal middle portion of a professional sports season. When a team describes its locker room after a blown home opener as positive, the most optimistic interpretation is that they are emotionally resilient. The most concerning interpretation is that they have not yet fully absorbed the weight of what losing at this level actually means. A head coach who preaches grace and a locker room that feels positive after surrendering 107 points at home to a lottery team is a combination that should make every single person invested in this franchise genuinely uncomfortable. The most genuinely alarming moment of the entire evening, however, had nothing to do with coaching philosophy or locker room culture. It happened when a reporter noticed that Caitlyn Clark had made multiple quick trips to the tunnel during the game and asked her about it directly. Clark's answer was casual and brief. She said she was just getting her back adjusted, that it gets out of line pretty quickly, and that she was just getting it put back in place. Gets out of line pretty quickly. Caitlyn Clark is 24 years old. She's one of the elite young athletic talents in professional basketball. She is in the absolute prime of her physical life. The idea that her spine requires routine mid-game manual realignment, not as a one-time incident but as something that gets out of line pretty quickly, suggesting a recurring pattern, is not a minor footnote. It is a flashing red warning light. Stephanie White's version of the same story was that the team wanted to be overly cautious and make sure they were not putting their player in any position to regress. She made it sound like standard conservative sports medicine. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. But these two descriptions of the same situation are not describing the same situation. Overly cautious standard maintenance does not get out of line pretty quickly. If a spine is requiring repeated in-game corrections, that is a structural issue that demands complete transparency, not PR-managed language designed to minimize fan concern. And the fan base has every reason to be skeptical. The organizational history here matters enormously. The front office spent months during the previous season managing a vague, shifting injury narrative that left fans with no clear picture of their superstar's actual physical status while continuing to market tickets and drive revenue. When you have already demonstrated a willingness to manage the injury narrative strategically rather than communicate about it transparently, you do not get to ask for trust the next time a health question arises. The fans have not forgotten, and they are watching this situation with the particular focused attention of people who have already been misled once. Step back from the individual quotes and look at the complete picture that this single evening has painted. You have a head coach who publicly stated that her team cannot pursue their primary competitive strategy. You have a franchise superstar who contradicted that statement on the record. You have a coach who responded to a defensive collapse by asking fans for grace and patience while subtly redirecting accountability toward her players. You have a locker room described as positive after a winnable home loss. You have a 24-year-old athlete describing spinal issues that require mid-game physical intervention on a recurring basis. And you have a front office whose track record on injury transparency has already cost them a significant portion of their fan base's trust. Separately, any one of these things could be explained away. Together, they paint a portrait of an organization that is under serious pressure, managing multiple overlapping crises simultaneously and communicating about all of them in ways that are making the situation worse rather than better. The ticket prices for the next home game have reportedly dropped to below $20. The seats that were sold at nearly $100 for opening night are being priced at a fraction of that value in the secondary market. This is not the behavior of a fan base that is frustrated but patient. This is the behavior of a consumer group that is actively withdrawing its financial confidence from a product that has not delivered on its promises. 43 games remain in the Indiana Fever's 2025 season. The math of a professional sports season is unforgiving, and there is genuinely enough time for everything discussed in this piece to be completely wrong by October. Defensive schemes improve, chemistry develops, coaches adapt, players heal. There are countless examples in professional sports history of teams that looked like disaster areas in May and lifted trophies in September. But none of those turnarounds happened because a coach asked for grace. None of them happened because the locker room was positive after a bad loss. They happened because someone in that building looked honestly at a difficult situation, took complete ownership of what was broken, and rebuilt it with urgency and absolute accountability. The Indiana Fever have all the talent they need to be exactly what they promised their fans they would be. Caitlyn Clark is every bit the generational player her fan base believes she is. Kelsey Mitchell is a legitimate first-team caliber professional. Aaliyah Boston is an elite interior presence. The offensive potential of this roster is not in question. What is in question is whether the leadership structure around that talent is capable of getting out of its own way long enough to let these players become what they can be. What is in question is whether a head coach who is asking for grace and declaring that her team cannot outscore opponents is capable of building the defensive culture and competitive edge this roster needs to complement its offensive firepower. And what is most urgently in question is whether the organization will be honest with its fans about the physical condition of the most important player in franchise history, or whether we are already watching the early chapters of a familiar story play out again in real time. The fans are watching, the receipts are being collected, and the comment section is waiting for answers that this organization has not yet provided. The season is 43 games long, the clock is already running. What was your reaction when Stephanie White said the Fever cannot outscore their opponents? Are you concerned about what Caitlyn Clark revealed about her back? And what does a positive locker room after a blown home opener tell you about the competitive culture of this team? Drop every single thought in the comments below. Subscribe for unfiltered analysis that respects both the basketball and the fans who love it.